All right. Hello to everybody that is tuning in tonight for another episode with the Coach's Corner. How is all of our wonderful guests? I guess how are all of our wonderful guests?
is our where was
technicalities.
Good evening, Vesper.
Good evening. I'm just going to say a couple words before I disappear and pass it off to you wonderful people. Those of you that are watching, by all means, ask questions. Just pop them into the chat box. I'm sorry if you hear whining in the background. My dog is sleeping and dreaming as we are speaking, so that is any weird noise you hear. But just drop some of the questions in the chat box. Ask everything and anything you'd like. Try to keep it on topic. And I think that's it for my part. So I will be passing this off to His Grace Duke Sean.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and thank you again for joining us on the Coach's Corner. We have a very interesting special episode for you tonight. Something that I've been looking forward to for quite some time now. So we're going to be discussing training for neurodivergent learning types, and we've got several guests tonight with us who have some very direct experience with this. I'm very excited and very happy to have their input on how we can better serve those in the fighting community that may have some neurodivergent learning traits, and for for the sake of definitions and disclaimers, first off, want to say that none of us on the panel tonight are mental health professionals. We are not here to diagnose any of your issues or disorders if you may have them. We are not offering like mental health like guidance, or like I said, it's not medical advice. So please don't take it as such. All of us have some experience dealing with a variety of mental health issues that I'll be getting to in just a second. That we've all got experience working with students that have a variety of things that affect their learning, and we wanted to talk about some of that tonight. And among other things, one of the things that I really wanted to do with this particular episode is I want to destigmatize mental health in our sport. I want to be able to talk about it and have an open and frank conversation with it, so that we as trainers can better serve those people that are affected by these in their training. It's a very easy thing that we can do to make our sport more accessible to people who struggle with some of these issues. So when we talk about neurodivergent learning models, what we're talking about, among other things, that includes but is not limited to autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, dyslexia, depression, anxiety, bipolar. There's a number of mental health issues out there that could affect your training, and as coaches and trainers, we need to be aware of what some of those things are, so that we can help those people that struggle with those things. So for our guests tonight, I'm joined by Count Sebastianos from the Mid-Realm, Baroness Sadb from Seabass is from Meridies. We got people out. We're all over the map tonight. So Seabass is a Meridies. He was king down there last year, right before the pandemic. Sadb is in the mid realm. She is currently Baroness of Roaring Wastes, which is the Detroit area. She happens to be squired to Duke Bronos, one of our coaches. And we have Sir Helgi from Kaid, who's joining us, and I've been working with Helgi for a number of years, and he is my very own Oprah Winfrey Book of the Month Club guy. If Helgi tells me to read a book, I'm going to get it, and I'll get around to reading it eventually, but I will definitely own it just on his recommendation. Seabass, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and kind of talk about some of what you got going on.
Hey, my name's Sebastianos. As I mentioned, most people just call me Seabass. As you mentioned, I'm a count from Meridies, from Atlanta, Georgia specifically. My lineage is a very teaching first lineage. My knight is a gentleman named Duke John the Mad Celt, and he's kind of my adopted father figure. The SEA, like a lot of people, for me, has been very much a kind of my adopted family. I had kind of a broken home growing up. And in many ways, it's kind of my rock in a lot of cases. I've got a lot of really strong relationships. I started in Ancior under a guy named Corwin Van Zant. He's a knight, and a bunch of his friends who are now knights, and then moved out to Meridies. I found a wonderful group of people out here who were very teaching first, big influence by Mad Celt. And I had a lot of troubles trying to learn how to communicate with people. Didn't know if I was upsetting someone, and so was I wanted or around, and I kind of looked like I was a loner because I'd stand off by my own, but when I talk to people, I talk really fast and accidentally talk over people because I was really, really excited. And so I had a kind of a difficult time getting to know certain types of people because they either their own issue, ours clashed, or they didn't understand where I was coming from, and we couldn't create a communication language. That being said, I met a ton of people that were absolutely awesome, and they're the reason why I've been doing this for 20-something years. So that's kind of the base intro thing that I've got. So thank you.
All right, and we have Baroness Sadb. I want you to let folks know a little bit about your experiences.
Sure. I'm Sadb Ingendankara. As he said, I am Squire to Duke Bronis and currently landed Baroness of Roaring Wastes in the Midrealm. I've been a heavy fighter for about 6 years, one of which was this year. Overall, I've had actually a very positive SCA and heavy fighting experience. My local group was super welcoming from the get-go, and I live in an area that is blessed with great fighters and teachers to learn from, many of them. So I've done a lot more learning than teaching so far. I am a bit earlier in my fighting career than most of these people here today, but I do my best to work with our newer fighters and teach what I know when I can. And also my knight is very specifically helping me to become the best trainer I can be as well as the best fighter I can be. ADHD, that is my neurodivergence. It has affected my fighting and training experiences in a lot of ways. On the sort of downside, I get to deal with all kind of fun memory problems. I have issues with impulsivity and distractibility and stuff like that that gets in the way during training time sometimes. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. And emotional regulation problems also get in the way sometimes. But on the upside, sometimes I get to have hyperfocus and dig extra super deep into things. I have pretty awesome organization skills that I've developed in my life to keep all of this information straight. And my brain by its nature is just absolutely driven to always seek more information, techniques, drills, perspectives, anything I can learn. I am never content to just sit and stay where I'm at. So I'm always pursuing what comes next.
All right. And we have Sir Helgi from Kaid. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hail everybody, I'm Helgi Hersir Raffenfedir. I live in the Los Angeles area in Kaid. I have run a training practice for probably over a decade now. And I suffer from major depressive disorder and attention deficit disorder, as well as generalized anxiety, which they're all kind of comorbid. And some of the symptoms that end up coming up are issues with low self-esteem, emotional regulation, like that Steve talked about, memory, working memory, and patterns of obsessive thoughts. In certain aspects, I do exactly like Steve as far as organization goes. I have the same I lose my train of thought in mid-sentence. And you know, one of the benefits though of this is the hyperfocus, or the pattern of obsessive thoughts when I can direct it at my martial career.
Nice. Yeah, and that's the thing we're looking at, is like there's a lot of these things that are comorbid, that have a lot of similar traits, that manifest a little bit differently. I have to say too, in the interest of full disclosure, I am, for as much as anybody can generally be considered so, I am very much neurotypical. I have a little bit of attention deficit. You know, I would say pretty normal levels of attention deficit, where get distracted easy and that sort of stuff. But for the most part, I'm neurotypical, so I don't have a lot of these problems myself. But I have dealt with a number of people that have had issues with a great number of these types of things, and so my experience is in helping others who suffer from some of these things to become better fighters themselves, and I'll be getting into some of that a little bit. But I think we're gonna start with the kind of autism, ADD type divergence, just to start with. So Sebas, you want to get us started with that a little bit?
Sure. So I failed to mention earlier, but I'm on the autistic spectrum. I'm considered high functioning autistic. So I was gonna just talk about some of my experiences in Meridia's from I've been really lucky because I've in Atlanta, Georgia, there's a lot of fighters and a lot of really gifted fighters. So I've had a lot of exposure to different people. The Mad Kelt and some others had this very teacher first kind of mentality, and it's like, so let's unpack that. What's that kind of mean? It's just there's a great excitement in our kingdom for newcomers and new fighters. Not only do groups tend to have their own loaner gear, we have a lot of people who have their own loaner kit and are constantly looking to have new people, getting them in armor and helping them through. And then one of the things that really I think is, I didn't realize really set us apart until I spoke to Duke Sean about it, is that we're very good about taking an advanced teacher with a upcoming intermediate fighter who is starting to show the interest in training, and then taking those people and going over to new fighters and teaching the intermediate fighter to teach the basics to the new person under the supervision of an advanced fighter, a marshal, etc. And so what it does is it allows the intermediate fighter to really unpack what they're trying to teach on the fundamental side to this new person, which makes them really think about what they're doing and why, and it improves their own game while they have to explain this. And then you can also sit down with them and really work on that communication, because everybody has a different communication. Communicating with me is going to be a lot different than Helgi or Sadb. So it's just you've got to kind of find out what that language is between the two of you, without having your ego in it, so that if your friend comes over and explains the exact same thing to you, to the student that you did, and then finally the light bulb hits and that person gets it, it's not that you did anything wrong or didn't explain it correctly. There's just some people that need this to hear it in a different way or from a different person. And so we, another thing that we do in Meridia's is we don't just fight, we do a lot of drilling. Earl Wolfstand's really awesome about that in our particular region, is getting new people out there and going through drills and really doing slow work and doing structured Pell work. But then at practices, we don't just go out and partner up and fight. And we tend to fight one or two sets of people at a time, and all the other fighters, though we're talking smack and talking about fighting, are really keen in watching the other fighters. And we have a culture where we will go over and interrupt after a pass is kind of disengaged and go, hey, did you know when you were doing this that it was this, or what were you trying to do when you did that? Because it looks interesting. And they explain it and go, okay, that's not what you were presenting. And so through that, people can find out things like, hey, did you know when you move like that, it's a really great fake because I think you're going left and you're really going right. And you should think about that and build it into your thing. To, you thought you were doing X and you're really doing Y and it was sloppy and someone can hit you for it. So we're pretty big on the structured education, and we give homework to people, go work on this. We send people over to Braylon Durame's 100 shots a day Pell challenge and stuff like that, try to get them involved there and then help them through it. So we do a lot of those things together that really seem to kind of help people come into our sport that have lots of different abilities and communication methods and stuff like that. And there's no real lines like this person's from this household and they can only teach here. It's very open in our kingdom, and it's just, we try to help make everybody better, both personally and as a fighter. And so those are kind of the highlights that I've got to bring to this as far as Meridia's and specifically the Georgia region.
And my understanding as relates to the topic is that type of structure is important to people with those divergence, especially the autism and the ADHD. Having a structure and having a system in place that you can follow is, from what I understand. I mean, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but for people on the autism spectrum, you kind of need to have that structure, and you need to have that. Without structure, we do really poorly. We have I always joke and say it's a different operating system. We're capable of having, being able to do, a lot of us at least, are capable of doing very normal things, but the bar shouldn't change, but how we get to the bar is going to be a little different. And so that structure really kind of helps us focus on what we're good at and how to get to that bar. And we do really well with short, focus goals in rapidity. So meet this goal and then yay, and it also gives us a little emotional good, and then move on. If you get a very big complex thing, we'll sit there and try to unpack it and twist it around, and it won't be particularly great anymore. So and you'll kind of lose the person. Right. Helgi, you had something on that?
The thing that I loved about what Sebas was talking about was just that a lot of us come in and we don't have the extroverted ability to go out and meet people. And the culture that they're setting up there is fantastic because it helps integrate those people in better into the game. So Sean mentioned that I'm a prolific reader. It's one of the ways that I've learned to manage the issues with my depression. I find that when I have a problem that I don't understand, I go out and I read about it, and I find out what other people have learned about it, and that helps me organize. And then it's no longer just, oh, this is one of my little idiosyncrasies that I have to avoid, inflicting on people, or I have to, hide, bottle up. And instead, I realize, oh, this is part of my condition. And I know that there are solutions out there. So as somebody who also reads a lot, one of the books that I'm taking a lot of what we're going to talk about from tonight is called Fear's the Mind Killer by Kaya Sadowski. If you haven't read this as a trainer, I highly recommend it. This isn't about how to set up drills or how to set up what to teach, and is more about how we build a culture of resilience, and how do we encourage our students to try things, to reach beyond where they feel comfortable, without scaring them away. And there's a quote that was mentioned in this book by a famous martial artist named Rory Miller. And he said, first you must make an emotionally safe place to practice physically dangerous things. And then you must make a physically safe space to do emotionally dangerous things. And I think this is really at the heart of not just what we're talking about here, where it's targeting neurodivergent people, but in general, how do we recognize what an individual's students' needs are, what type of risks they bring to the field with them, and how can we help mitigate or accommodate some of those things? And if you'd like to.
There you go. All right. Sadb, did you have something?
We had a question coming in already asking sort of what things helped each of us with their training, incorporating what things we incorporated to help us as neurodivergent learners that could also help neurotypical learners. So I will just dive right in with some of the things that I have had to adjust for myself. The big thing, the first thing I mentioned, one of the things that affects me most often is I have poor working memory. It's one of the things with ADD, and what that really means is my short-term memory practically doesn't exist. Sometimes, at its worst, it doesn't exist. So I'm sitting at a practice and you're giving me a bunch of information. I'm going to remember very little of it if I don't go write it down. So my solution is I have a notebook that goes everywhere with me, every practice, every event, and I write down everything that happens in it. Not just big important things, but like, oh, I fought this person and the fight went about like this. And that's enough to jog my memory later and get back everything that I need. But if I don't do that, my knight will ask me later, be like, oh, who'd you fight at practice last week? I don't know. In fact, the way my notebook started, it's grown over time, was just week to week coming to practice. I legitimately could not remember what did we work on last week? What was I trying to get better at? And so I just started making a bulleted list of we worked on this shot and we worked on this piece of footwork and here's the other important thing that was said. And then next practice, I would pull it out, go, yep, that's what I was working on. And that was huge for me because now I could get continuity in my training. It wasn't just randomly jumping around because I didn't remember what I was supposed to be working on. And Baroness or other trainers, people that were working with me before I was squired, that kind of thing, they could sometimes remember, but they're also training a whole bunch of people. I'm not expecting them to specifically remember what they worked on with me. So me having my own stuff helped a lot. I also have to write down a whole bunch of other things, not just what we worked on at practice, but if I have a piece of armor that broke at practice and I need to fix it, I'm not going to remember that when we get home and it's sitting in my bag. It's just not going to happen. So I will literally pull out my phone right after it breaks and set myself a calendar reminder that's going to go off Thursday night at 8 o'clock because that's when we have our weekly armoring time. So I know I will be available to work on it. And that reminds me, oh, go get that thing and fix it. And then that works. If I just write it down, I may not remember to check. So that way it's in my face when I need it.
Yeah. We talk a lot on the show about, the fact that part of what we're trying to do as trainers and me and Baroness in particular for a long time have been trying to change the way that the SCA teaches our sport. We're trying to get away from the pain management training methodology. The idea that if you just hit somebody hard enough and often enough that they're just gonna figure it out. And so we've been trying to switch more to a training based platform, much like what Sebastianos was talking about, that they have. Our practice here in our barony is very much the same way. It is a training focused practice. This is not the place where you can come in and try to be the king of practice. You know, if you want to do that, that's fine, because, you know, we've got several of our past kings that are here, and, you know, we can put you up against that guy and see if you can be king of practice. But that's just a horribly inefficient training methodology, and we're trying to move away from that. And it turns out that, again, that system and that structure tends to benefit neurodivergent people. And so that's if you know, if we needed another argument for why we should be training our sport more like a martial art, and you know, and less like, you know, less like a you know, a high school bully fight. Yeah, I mean, this is an area in which this can benefit just a wide range of fighters with different, not just different physical skills, but with different mental and emotional skills as well. So we had another question that came in. It was, what signals do you look for to determine what communication method to take for a student? Helgi, would you like to jump on that?
Sure. So a lot of it is trial and error. You give an analogy to someone, and you see how well that analogy sticks. All teaching comes down to these analogies, right? I'd like you to do this, but I need to figure out how to communicate this. And, you know, I wish there was a more efficient way of doing it. But, you know, even the like psychological tests aren't going to tell me like how to apply this to a given student.
Yeah, and teacher, like one of the things I think you can do though is be very upfront and honest with this teacher, so that with the student, so that you can go, hey, you know, tell me when you get this. Make sure that you give, or, you know, communication's a two-way street. If you're just talking to them, congratulations, that's a lecture. You're not really teaching. You're just giving, I mean, you are, lectures are teaching, but there's only certain people that can learn that way. You've got to make sure that you're giving information and that they're acknowledging that they comprehended you on some level. And then you have to define terms. Make sure that you're using terms in the same way, because, you know, what I think is a thumb lead might not be the same thing to what Duke Sean thinks is a thumb lead, even though I surmise that we have the same definition. But make sure that you've got a standard communication, so that you can not only give little one-word feedback things like in a fight to someone, but to help correct them, but at the same time getting it where you guys are saying kind of the same thing. Helgi?
Yeah, so as far as the cues go, one of the big cues that I look for when somebody has got it are those epiphany moments, right? Where somebody's face just lights up, like that's them getting it, right? They may not be able to translate that into movement yet, but the concept that I've tried to communicate with them meant something, right? And then we can work on helping them translate that into movement. And a lot of the problems, especially when we start with brand new students, we have to help them develop a language with which they can communicate with their body, right? If you take Baroness's offside, that beautiful short little jab offside that he throws, and you were to say, okay, emulate this to a brand new fighter, they're gonna arm the shot every single time, right? Because they can't see the detail of the core that goes into it and the footwork that sets it up and all of these small little tiny things, right? And when we start, we all often have to start with motions that are bigger than what the final product will be, right? Because to learn how to use the gross moving muscles, right, we have to they have to exert that set of muscles, and then again you work on refining it down into smaller and smaller, more efficient motions. The other part that we the other cue that I really want to look for are cues of frustration, you know, because that's telling me that whatever I'm telling them is not working. And while part of practice has to be failing, because we don't learn when we do things right. We learn when we do things wrong and then make adjustments, right? So part of the learning process has to be failure. And if you're successful every single time you do the technique, you are not going to be able to adapt, to change, to figure out how to make it work in different situations or contexts. But if we get to the point where they're failing too much, that's when frustration sets in, right? And we want to control and moderate that. So.
Speaking of losing your train of thought, I had a thought there for a second, and then I totally lost it. The neurotypical guy just loses his train of thought. How about that?
As it turns out, it's human.
It's weird, yeah. So we got another question that came in. I'm gonna have Sadb start with this one. So one of the questions that came in was, would you say that pressure affects neurodivergent learners differently than neurotypical learners? And I think I've had some really good stuff on this.
Yes, in short. Pressure affects us different than neurotypical folks, and also just between different neurodivergent people, depending on their specific cocktail of stuff, it'll affect us all differently too. For me personally, the one that gets me the most is that whole poor emotional regulation thing that I mentioned earlier. And what that really means is that my highs are extra high and my lows are extra low, and they can shift on a hair trigger. So I'll be having a great day and everything's cool, and then something gets a little frustrating, and then I have a fight or an exercise or something that doesn't go real well, and I will hit the ground. And pressure is one of those things. There's a lot of different ways we can define pressure, so I'm not 100% sure which one you're doing, but when I feel a lot of pressure and it becomes negative in my mind for any reason, if my emotional regulation is not doing well that day, I will just down the tube. And that becomes an even bigger problem, that, you know, things bother me more, they're a bigger deal to me than they really ought to be. And I know that. It's really fun being able to logically look and say, huh, I am definitely overreacting to this, and that does not help it at all. So then I'm worried about that. And there's a lot of mental energy that goes into sort of containing that, and with the being annoyed that I know it's an overreaction and can't make it stop anyway. And so the more mental energy that I'm expending on just trying to contain this emotional whatever, the less energy I have less to do other things like practice. So that's a way where it can go really wrong, but you can work around that. Having a good trainer that knows you and can see those signs that you're shutting down helps. Because one, if you're willing to communicate with each other, I can just, like me and Baroness, we've had to work through this a lot. I will just look at him, go, this is going really badly, and we will redirect to some other thing. And like, let's work on something less frustrating for now until I can get myself back in check. This is another place where, as we were talking about, structure in practice also helps a lot with this problem, because structure and routine do not require a lot of mental energy. So if I'm real tied up in whatever weird mental thing has happened because I'm feeling the bad pressure or whatever it is, we can just start running through the routine for practice. We do this, and then we work on this, and then we work on this, and it doesn't eat up my energy, and it's actually kind of calming and soothing per se, and it can help take that emotional state and bring it back down to where it needs to be.
Well, and I'd imagine that's where drills and Pell work is particularly beneficial,
Absolutely.
because there is a right way to do it, and you know that if you just go through the mechanic and you do it the right way as you've been taught, it's one of those things that you can, among other things, it's something you can do where you know that you're doing something right. And there's an emotional benefit to that. I mean, it's the little successes, you know. William McRaven wrote a book called Make Your Bed. You know, he had a famous speech on 10 things that can kind of help you improve in life, and it starts with make your bed in the morning. And the reason that he talks about that is, if you make your bed in the morning, you've started off your day accomplishing something. And so with that sort of stress kind of piling on, there's a lot of those emotional responses that come into play, where am I doing this right? And that sort of death spiral thinking leads to, am I doing this right? Am I a terrible person? Whereas if you can just do Pell work and you can do drills, you know that you're doing something right, and you can just kind of let yourself be, and you don't have to think about it, and you don't have to get wrapped up in the emotional component of what's going on.
And it allows you to sort of salvage a practice that might have gone completely useless otherwise. If whatever emotional thing happened and was shutting me down, I at least have something I can go work on, because we've got drills or this or that or the other. So it does a lot for saving what, if practice was just, we're gonna go spar and that's literally all we do. Once I'm not in a place to do that, practice is shot. But since we have other things, again, the structure, when we have those other things to do, it helps a lot. Yes.
Sebastianos?
Yeah, mine's a little bit different. I have I've gotten a lot better with it as I've gotten older. I've got a little bit more compensation around it, but it's still like rears its ugly head at the most inoperable times. But I have a thing like where it's called projection, where like I will project what I expect of a situation, and I have already figured out in my brain X, Y, Z, Q, R, and Z are going to happen in this order, and if they get jostled around or moved, I'll get really frustrated and flustered and won't be able to handle it very well, and can kind of, and couple that with my the fact that I'm blunt and have no filter, and that if I do have an emotional reaction, whatever word was on the tip of my tongue when that happened will fire out of my mouth, and I'll go, oh, that was probably a little rough, didn't necessarily mean that, or it'll sound curt. And for a long time, I didn't know that it was sounding curt. Other people kind of came up and go, "Did you know that was as sharp as you did you mean it to be that sharp?" But as far as what you were talking about, as far as Pell work and stuff, in structure, I went to military high school, which was the greatest foundation I could have ever had to help kind of have structure. Like, I make my beds in the morning, when I made the biggest jump in my fighting career, I was going to a friend of mine, Baron, Helgi, and we set up 5 Pells in his backyard. We did Asgard reaction drills. We did Pell work. You were only supposed to bring your helmet, gorget, sword shield, and demi gauntlets. We didn't fight, and we did it twice a week. And that consistency with other training partners really helped. And then as I got way more advanced in my career, was really kind of hitting this tournament circuit and fighting in crowns all the time and stuff like that. Earl Wolfstand and I fought together all the time with the sole purpose of getting better and driving each other to be better and better. And consequently, he won a crown, and then I ended up winning a crown. So, but he helped. He was really my buddy who kind of helped me on focus and go, hey, did you realize that you do this or do that? And then understood that I have a different operating system than the average person, and could build off some of those unique talents and skills that I could bring to bear. The difference I have than both of them, is that because my focus is so hyper, if I'm in a tournament, I don't get nervous. Like I don't get headspace because I just see the other guy. It's time to play high speed chess, and I don't really get frustrated. Now, if someone comes out and starts talking to me and takes me out of that's not the martial, then I'm more prone to be concerned and start to get nervous, and my game will fall apart.
Helgi?
So one of my big issues is, and this dovetails off of both of these, both of them have said, is low self-esteem. And low self-esteem is defined as an increased emotional reactivity to criticism. And the other part of this is that there tends to be an increased stress reactivity as well. So I can, learn how to deal with a situation and be completely okay, but I have a bad day at work. The train took an hour longer than it was supposed to, whatever the stressor is, and now my emotional reactivity goes all over the place. When we have one of the things that I've found that my knight and the people around me had to help me deal with low self-esteem is, how do you provide feedback? And especially because that constructive feedback is inherently important to getting better in our sport. If you can't take feedback, you're going to struggle a lot more to get through or to find working solutions. And the way that some of the things that worked for me and that I've seen work for other people that I experience this with, and a lot of the time when you watch somebody who is receiving criticism, if they just just start shrinking kind of in front of you, or avoid making eye contact, or sometimes it actually even looks like they're dismissive, like, what the hell do who are you to tell me what I need to learn or need to do? And that, a lot of the solutions for that is to provide them with tools by which they can self-assess. The more you can find ways to emotionally distance yourself from those, from that criticism, the better it is. And the easier it becomes to control that emotional dysfunction.
It's really hard.
So, for example, I love watching video. I study video all the time. And we started with watching other people, right? We started looking at, okay, what is this person doing? Where they're, we've talked about what makes good technique versus bad technique. And where do you see that? And because you're doing this with another person, you have an emotional distance, right? Then we moved on to looking at my own fights. And now I have this fight that I'm temporally separated from. I'm no longer invested. I can't change the outcome of it, right? And by watching the video, I could learn to pick apart the details that were important, right? And then take that back into what it was I was, working on or learning. And yeah.
Video review.
Yeah. And yep. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just lost it completely.
No, that's right. I mean, part of that when you're looking at video review is it's different when you're looking at somebody else on video, because there's an objectivity involved in that. And I think kind of what you were getting at is when you start watching yourself do it, even though you can't change the outcome of it, there's still and you're still emotionally invested in either the outcome, all the coulda, woulda, shoulda, it's like all the stuff that I could have done in that fight, and I didn't. And because you're watching yourself and you have that emotional connection, there's a little bit of that, I think, that is going to be like, there's again, that self-doubt. And you're going to look at something that you do and you're going to say, oh God, you're so stupid, why did you do that? Am I right?
Yeah. So one of the other things that has helped a lot is, instead of giving feedback, direct, like, this is what you should do, or you're making this mistake, is ask them questions. What was happening in this fight? What were you thinking about? What mistakes do you think you made? And this now allows them to provide their own criticism. It's no longer external criticism. It's kind of internal. And you can also put some emotional distance between that, because you're asking them to reflect. And that reflection doesn't always have to happen at that moment. One of the other big suggestions that I have is, if the person is shutting down because of feedback, make sure that you're letting them come down out of that adrenalized state. That adrenalized, when you are all up, it just makes the emotions and the cognitive processing that much harder. It makes the frustration that much louder in your head. And sometimes even just giving it like a minute or two to get your breathing back, refocus, that criticism that a minute before was, now you can easily accept. So
yeah. So we've got there is so much involved in this topic, and we knew that there would be, and there's so many variations of neurodivergence that are going out. We're going to move on to the next segment of this, but I wanted to briefly kind of touch on another question that came up, which was, how important is consistency in general? Does it affect you significantly when there are unexpected changes? And I think Helgi just kind of talked about some of that. And that's kind of some of the stuff that we're seeing in general throughout the conversation, is having a system in place, having that consistency, having a structure, having a plan, having a right way to do things, so that when you do it right, as you were instructed, that you're on course. So that consistency definitely helps.
Yeah, if you project, if you have a person that projects, it's pivotal. Like, they will bomb if you start changing stuff.
Yeah. So one of the other things that we wanted to talk about that affects a great number of fighters in our sport is post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which manifests in a great variety of ways. The two most common areas in which we see PTSD are situations that are overall, there are situations that involve very real life and death circumstances that you've dealt with outside of our sport. We reference what we do as combat or martial art, but one of the so our fighting system is very unique in that, compared to other martial arts, we allow and expect full speed, full contact in a way that no other martial art does. If you go to a Taekwondo tournament, all of those, with the there's Olympic, and then there's just your typical garden variety, intramural competition. Most of those competitions are to touch, because if you were to execute those techniques properly, you're going to kill somebody. And so we have an advantage in that we get to actually hit people full speed, full contact. The other side of that is, because of the safety standards that we have, because of the armor standards that we have, we do not have that threat of very real danger, right? We are not in a sport where I mean, we have what we call our kill standard, right? But nobody's dying here, right? That's not the intent. It's like, we're talking about doing violent things, but for the most part, we know that we're safe. We know that we're not going to get injured. We know that the intent of our opponent is not to do us physical bodily harm, long lasting. I mean, as we often say, ours is a sport where we want to kill our friends, we don't want to hurt them, right?
You have beers afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I mean, you can kill them, but if you hurt them, then they got to go to the hospital, and you can't have beers with them later, right?
We don't break.
And who wants that? Don't break your toys, right?
Don't break your toys.
Don't break your toys.
But there are people work on Monday.
Yeah, but there are people who have come to our sport with a variety of very real world life and death situations that affect how they fight in our sport. Primarily, these are going to be so there's two categories that it's kind of one is basically the people who have done violent things, and then there are the people who have had violent things done to them. So the first category we're talking about combat veterans, corrections officers, bar brawlers, people that just decided that they need to pick a fight with somebody, any of those sorts of things where, having somebody hit you with a stick in their sport when you're fully armored is very different from being in Afghanistan, having somebody pointing an AK-47 at you, right? And let's make no bones about the severity of how very different that is. The other category of PTSD is basically it comes down to abuse victims, people that have had abusers, and not to put too fine a point on it, but typically those are going to be women in our sport, and how that trauma manifests is a little bit different. I've had former squires of mine and people that I've worked with that are combat veterans, and that are, like I said, bar brawlers. I had one of my squires that was that kid in high school who, when new kid comes to school and needs to kick somebody's ass, they had to go to, this is the guy you go to. And so, kind of a rough upbringing. But those types of things, people who have done violent things, one of the ways that manifests in our sport is they actually have they have a hard time finishing a fight in some cases, because what happens is generally these are people who have been trained through either military practice or through just experience. They have a certain amount of training, and when it is time to execute that training, there's a line that they are kind of afraid to cross, because once they cross that line, they don't know what's going to happen. And what happens is you cross that line, you get into a fight, something happens, a shot lands wrong, something gets triggered, you end up in a close physical contact, and they cross that line, and they don't know what's going to happen after that. So you'll see a lot of these guys that are very hesitant to push too hard and to unleash the beast and to be kind of savage. Had one of my former squires who's a combat veteran who kind of struggled with that a little bit, and it took him a bit to realize that you can tap into that brutality and that savagery just a little bit, and that nobody's actually going to die. But that's a very real thing where you don't know what's going to happen. And in a lot of cases, when they cross that line and when something happens like that, they're not going to know what happened, because the training takes over and you execute, and then you come out of it and you look up and all of a sudden there's just bodies laying around you and you don't know why. You don't know what happened. And I've talked to guys who do that in our sport, where you get into a melee situation and you're surrounded by, all these people that just need to be killed. And then you kind of blank out a little bit and you look around and your work's done. So those are some of the ways that I've seen it. The best thing that I've been able to do to kind of confront that particular part of the PTSD is explaining to people that that this is not combat, and that these are your friends, which they know, but that it is okay. And people aren't going to get hurt, and it's a hard sell for some people. But the best way that I've been able to kind of mitigate that a little bit and kind of help people get through that is explaining, rather than looking at it as combat, we look at it as sport. We look at it, basically it's a chess game, right? As Sebastian has mentioned before, and I'll probably have him talk about this in a second. It's high speed chess, right? It's chess really, really fast. But if you've got a chessboard laid out and somebody moves a piece on the chessboard and exposes the queen to your bishop, well, you just pick up your piece and you execute the queen, right? That's it. And that's what we have to look at here, is when you're looking, you see a target, your opponent exposes a target, and you execute a shot that takes advantage of that target. It's very much the same thing. And if we can kind of reframe it a little bit and take away, basically we have to take away the emotional response that is involved in the PTSD, because that's entirely what this is. And whether it's whichever side of the PTSD you're on, it's an emotional response, and we have to eliminate that emotional response as much as we can, and we kind of have to reframe it. Sebastian, you want to touch on that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I don't have PTSD. I've never been a big hero or anything, or had my life at risk, but I very much have that philosophy. It's been a big part, because I just to approach fighting in general, I didn't get it. It was kind of my emotions were all over the place. I'd project, but when it became a game, when it became, I do this thing to move your shield or body here, and then I step here to make you twist and do a little thing and try to take advantage of something, all of a sudden my brain went on fire and was like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. Now that's just a spectrum thing, but the high speed chess analogy I use a lot with teaching, because it's effectively what we're doing. You're playing high speed chess where you're connected to a car battery that'll shock you when you screw up, in the form of being hit. It's I found that gets the point across to a lot of people, and it also helps frame their mindset that just because they make a mistake while they're learning how to move pieces around on the board, they don't get as frustrated, because it's like, yeah, no, you did good. You played the first 2 rounds, and now we're getting into the third one. This is the next stage of that evolution. And so I think that mindset's particularly helpful. It also allowed me to divorce any emotions that I had or toward the fight, or feeling bad about potentially hitting somebody. I'm not a small human being. I'm 6'3", about 250. And I would get real squeamish about hurting someone just because I didn't want to, and I've never done it. So that's kind of, and it was something that Mad Kelp passed on to me. He's like, no, this is a high speed chess game.
Yeah. Helgi, you had something on the other side of the PTSD there?
But the other side of it isn't just abuse victims, though. It's actually anyone who has had a moment where they thought they were going to die. I'm not saying that everybody who's had a near-death experience is going to have PTSD, but there are this broad category of things like survivors, basically, people who have survived natural disasters, people who have survived, things, accidents, where they thought, it's over, I have to make peace with this at this exact moment. And fundamentally, at its base, PTSD is the problem that we're experiencing is the response to adrenaline and cortisol, right? Those two neurotransmitters, especially, they do weird things to the brain. They activate part of the brain that is involved with reflective, memory, right? And this is so when we talk about like triggers that start these, right? The memory of this, and all of a sudden your adrenaline is spiking up, your heart is racing. And the things that Sean was talking about too, a lot of those symptoms of, you don't know what's happened, you've forgotten, the discontinuities are very, very common when you have these highly adrenalized states, mixing with cortisol, because the same thing doesn't happen with just normal athletes, say, right, where the adrenaline is going up, but not always mixing it necessarily with the cortisol. And the some of the big things that we can do as trainers to help this is, number one, be aware of freezing responses, especially, right? The adrenal system is basically triggers the fight, flight, or freeze response, and the freeze is the one that we're most, that will probably be really obvious, right? The fleeing, that is pretty obvious too, but right. So be aware of what triggers are. And a lot of the times our students may not be aware of what those triggers are, what things, trigger them. And so we want to help bring out conversation, or use conversation to have them talk about what these are, so that we as trainers can also help avoid that until they are ready to deal and confront with those issues. Fundamentally, at its basic, our sport, there is an implicit consent that we have, right? Our rules specifically say that when you come to the field, you are giving consent to fight your opponent, whoever they are. And if you don't feel safe fighting that individual, you are free to not step on the field, and that's acceptable. When we're dealing with training, there's a little bit more gray area, and so I really support the idea of explicit consent in a lot of teaching. For example, if you make contact with your student, like, I'm going to help adjust your hips, or your shield position, or whatever. I try to make I ask them a question. Can I touch you? Can I make this adjustment? And this isn't just for women, or use this for everyone, right? This is fundamentally helping them set boundaries for what is acceptable behavior and what is unacceptable behavior, and communicate those with you, right? If you, nope, it's gone.
No, that's some good stuff there. Thanks, Helgi. And I think Helgi just really kind of summarizes the one category of PTSD as basically survivors, right? It can be abuse victims. It can be, somebody who's been in a survived a plane crash or a car crash or whatever. Basically comes down to survivors. And one of the things to understand about how that manifests for them is particularly abuse victims are going to have a difficult time with the concept of somebody hitting them in the head. If that is part of your specific survivorship, that can be a problem, and having basically having physically violent things done to you, if that is the nature of their trauma, that's going to be something that they're going to have to work through. You know, we had one of my former squires kind of developed a system for new fighters in our area where, you know, when we get somebody new and we want to, you know, when they want to try it out, you know, day one he'll take a stick and he's, you know, he says, okay, well, I'm going to throw a leg shot that I consider to be a light leg shot in our system, and are you prepared for me to hit you with a light blow in the leg? And they say yes, and you hit them with a light blow in the leg, and then you say, I'm going to hit you with an average blow in the leg. Are you prepared for me to hit you with an average blow in the leg? You hit them a little bit harder, and you just kind of like, you know, you kind of build up, and it's basically light, average, hard, and you know, hit them in, like, go through that progression and see what levels they're comfortable with. You know, I'm gonna hit you in the leg, I'm gonna hit you in the arm, I'm gonna hit you in the body. Now I'm gonna hit you in the head. And having somebody hit you in the head with a stick can be, you know, for a lot of us, I mean, that's why we're here, right? It's like, so eventually I get to hit you with a stick too, right? I mean, that's why I'm here. I'm here to hit people with sticks. But you know, if you can't handle, you know, if you can't handle that, if you don't have the emotional capacity to handle being hit with a stick, that's going to be a problem in our sport, because that's kind of the nature of it. And you know, and maybe you can work through that and maybe you can't, and that's a personal decision. That's something that each individual fighter is going to have to work through. But that is a very easy thing that we can do from the very, very beginning, from the first time that somebody is introduced to our sport. If you say, oh, you want to try this, then okay, this is what you should expect, and this is a range of possibilities that you could hit. We don't try to hit excessive, but it happens, and are you going to be okay with that? And so that's, as in survivorship, that's something that is increasingly important, I think, to have that clear communication, that clear understanding. And that's kind of what we're talking about. This whole thing is destigmatizing that and having those conversations, and so that we can better serve our fighting community. So we're going to switch back a little bit to one of the earlier question, one of the other questions that we had there. I'm going to let Sadb take this as far as kind of achievable tasks. So why don't you go ahead with that?
So we've been talking a lot about structure in your practice and how that's very good for neurodivergent folks and for everyone. I wanted to sort of expand on that in a similar but not exactly the same topic. For me in particular with ADHD, really what that is it's an executive function disorder, and that manifests as problems with self-motivation, time management, planning, problem solving, all that kind of stuff. And one of the big ones is a massive difficulty breaking down large abstract tasks or problems into their component steps. And the larger and more abstract that thing is, the goal, whatever it is that you're trying to do, the worse it's going to be. And it very quickly gets overwhelming, and then it becomes nigh impossible to even start. So what is super helpful, and that applies to me with executive function problems and also to brand new fighters that just don't know what's going on yet, or anyone that benefits from this, is go ahead and help your students break things down into discrete, achievable tasks. That is sort of my key word. Something that is clearly defined. You're supposed to do X, Y, Z. This is what achieving that will look like. This is the final result we're going for. It helps get things going and stops that sort of overwhelmed by, wait, I don't know how to do whatever this big giant thing is. For I guess an example for me is I never had a good time with, all right, we're going to learn this technique, how to throw this shot on the pel real quick. Cool. Now go incorporate that into your fight. There's a lot of things you have to do to incorporate a shot into your fight. And I never really, I was never doing well with figuring out how to do that on my own. So a lot of stuff would live on the pel and then never show up in a fight. And one of the things that the way that we have gotten over that and are helping me get a lot better at incorporating new things into a fight is we've made a series of drills that build on each other. So first we just throw the shot. Okay, now we throw the shot while we're moving. It's not a fight, we're just moving. Predictable movement. And then we do unpredictable movement. And then we do it with adding fakes beforehand, and suddenly it's almost a real fight, and then it's a real fight and I can do it. And for me, trying to figure out with no template how to do all of those things just was not working. So that's helpful for everyone, not just ADHD people, but it's in line with that having structure.
Yeah, that's one of the things I found in conversation with these guys and others is, curiously enough, the things that are beneficial to neurodivergent learning types are also beneficial to neurotypical learning types. But Sebastianos actually has some personal, professional experience in exactly that. You want to talk about the agile Scrum stuff?
Yeah. So, so first off, we're human, so that's kind of where the common thread is. So all we're doing with our particular neurodivergences are very, very different. We've had a lot of time to talk over the last week, so it's one of those things where, and I also can lose my train of thought. Give me 1 second. The being able to go here, I'll jump into the Scrum stuff. So what I do is manage development teams across the United States, and we have a thing called Scrum. It's an agile process, and what it does is it takes really complex things and it breaks them up into epics, and then there are themes, and then you break them up into these smaller increments of stories, and then you have tasks within those stories. And so a story ends up being a achievable increment of work that adds to a particular product and is generally demoable and stuff like that. So taking that exact same mindset to fighting, you break up what you're trying to work on and trying to build on these smaller chunks. I made an analogy to these guys the other day, whereas fighting is thousands of mountains to climb, and each mountain is its own skill set, and if you get to the top of the mountain, you're a master at it. So fakes is a mountain, and feigns and z-axis, and then broad footwork, and all these different things are their own ones, and you only get a couple that you get to climb to the max. The rest of them, you're going to get some speckled areas of it, you get intermediate and stuff, and you take that mix of tools and put it together. Well, how do you get to that? Well, you in our case, as I mentioned earlier, I had a team of friends and we did Pell drills and working with Earl Wolfstand. But one of the things is we break it down into these small chunks of things. Is like, what is the goal for our practice today, or what are the 2 goals? And then we really focus on that and incorporating those things into both our fight and into our drills, so that it sinks in, not on the conscious level, but in that lizard brain of ours that we're trying to do. I also, I think his Duke Uther has a Pell drill that's the 1-to-many drill or something like that. You're 1-1, 1-2, 1-3, 1-4, 2-1, 2-2, and so on. Well, we did an A, B, and C depths and worked on this drill because it's highly structured, and what it does is it teaches you, no matter where your sword ends up, it teaches your lizard brain how to put that sword to another place with simple cue of 1A is open, 3C is open, and then you would take the steps necessary and then throw the shots that you needed to throw. That level of structure you can really break down and help someone learn wraps, or help someone work J shots, or short sticks, inside or outside. At any rate, I find that same development management approach is very useful for our teaching for fighting. So. And I'm also a very weak upper body guy, so I had to learn my hips and all that stuff. So I had to do that a lot.
Actually, a long time ago, when I developed the basic Pell routine that I use to start people with fighting, shit, for the longest time, the number one reason that I get for people telling me that they can't do Pell work is I don't have time. So I built a Pell routine that addressed exactly that. It's what I call my 3-minute Pell routine, and it is designed specifically to address the world of instant gratification that we live in. And and that attention deficit thing. I mean, if I tell you to go out and throw 100 flat snaps, you're going to get to maybe 30 of them before you start getting bored with it. So the Pell routine that I created is basically, it's 5 basic shots and it's 10 each. So you can focus long enough to throw 10 perfect flat snaps, and then 10 perfect lead snaps, and then 10 offside head wrap and leg wrap. And you can focus on just doing that one part correctly. And again, that's the discrete attainable goals. It's like, I'm just gonna Sebastian, you had talked about it in increments, right?
Yeah.
That is I think that's the term that the Navy SEALs use as well. Increments. And sometimes that increment is especially when they're in Hell Week, where they get 4 hours of sleep in a 7-day period. Sometimes that increment is, I'm going to finish these 10 push-ups, and then I'm going to move on to the next increment. It's like, and being able to break it down in those things. So you don't have to say, how am I going to survive Hell Week? How am I going to live for 7 days on 4 hours of sleep? It's like, you live for the next 20 minutes, and you get done with that increment.
It's the same thing with melee fighting, right? Like someone that goes to Penzik, right? And they're like, but there's 2,000, 3,000 people. Yeah, but you can only comprehend like 20 of them. So don't worry about it. Like, it doesn't matter if you're in Gulf Wars or Estrella, Great Western Lilies, whatever. You only can concentrate on 15 to 20 dudes. So, I mean, so don't try to wrap your head around the whole thing. At some point in time, maybe you can be a commander and have to worry about that. But, in the short term, don't overwhelm yourself. So, yeah, I totally agree on that one.
Yeah, and actually in the Book of Five Rings, Musashi talks about, if one man can be trained to beat 10 men, then 10 men can beat 100 men, and 100 men can beat 1,000 men. It's like, I don't have to beat 2,000 people. I have to beat these 3 guys right here. And sometimes I don't even have to beat them.
Yeah,
I just have to keep. I just got to stall them. Yeah. I just have to keep them from destroying my other guys.
Another fun one on the Pell drills that really help kind of break up the monotony. So when we're talking about like the many to one drill, and so you've got your 6 to 8 rings or 6 to 10 rings, and you've got your A, B, and C depth. Get your sadistic partner to come out there and call different number combinations for you. So you're sitting there and you throw, and they're like, throw a 2A, and you throw a 2A, and they go, throw a 7C, and you're like, they don't even know what it takes to go from A to B. Just they'll start to figure out some of those transitions are really hard for you, and they'll screw with you a lot. It's fun. Get your friends to do it. But it's a really great way to break up boring Pell work, and you're not throwing patterns and combinations. I can't stress enough. Don't do that. Like, you need to flow. All right. So what you're doing is you're probing, you're using your defense or your offense to make your opponent move in ways you want to open up other things that are 2 and 3 moves down the way that they're not thinking about. And so to do that, you can't be throwing combos, and you need to be able to throw with your body so that your arm can make adjustments to that shot on the fly. So if you're throwing just a regular flat snap and you see they're going to block it, if I'm throwing with my body from my ankle, I can turn that into a wrap by just rolling my elbow over. So there's little things like that you have to build up, that all these little foundational increments build up to, that are very advanced tactics later on, or techniques later on, that you won't get access to if you don't do some of these fundamental things up front.
Exactly. Yeah, when I created that 3-minute Pell routine, my progression of Pell work is, I start with the 3-minute Pell routine because it's very structured, very rigid, very much there is a right way to do it. There's an X number of blows to throw. Because a lot of people, when they go to do Pell work, they're like, what does Pell work mean?
Yeah.
I just go out and I just go out and throw, but I'm like, I'm going to give you a precise number of blows to throw. In a very specific achievable task. Yeah. I'm going to give you a very specific order that you need to do those in. And then I move from the 3-minute Pell routine into that 1 through 6 drill. And so the 1 through 6 drill it still has structure in that, there's an ordered number of blows that you're throwing, but there's more flow to it because it's how do I get from any one blow to any other blow.
Without
and so
having
there's
to tell your body.
yeah, and so it's that progression from, and this is one of the things we talked about last week in our episode on Bloom's taxonomy and Gardner's multiple intelligences as knowledge base, right? So the first part of it is there is a right way to do this, and thou shalt not deviate from the path. And then the 1 through 6 drill is find your flow, just do it in these order. And then the third phase of Pell work that I teach after that is what I call free flow Pell work, which is that's how I teach people to understand the natural return path. And with the free flow Pell work, there is no next blow. There's no right way to do it. But you have to go through, especially when we're talking about neurodivergent. This is a pattern that works, that I think would work really well for somebody. Give them that structure in the beginning, to just teach them how to do the blows so that they know that they know what they have to do. And then you kind of loosen that up a little bit with the 1 through 6 and get more flow. And then you can go to the free flow and just say, just throw. You've already taught your body how to do the thing, so you know how to throw. So
Yeah.
Helgi, let me have you throw some stuff in there.
Yeah, so I mentioned before that part of our job is to moderate the difficulty that we're giving, because we want our students to fail, but not so much that they get frustrated, right? We're trying to balance between those two. And so we're trying to find the cognitive level at which they can solve a problem, right? And so like if we're working on a Pell, we can deal with a blocked segment where they just work on one set of, one set of blows or one set of transitions or, whatever that is. You can then increase in complexity once they demonstrate the consistency of that to, the variable, which is much more like the Duke Uther's 1 through 6, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 3, right? But in that case, we aren't, we're changing, but we're still going by pattern. We aren't taking outside information. And then you can also do randomized practice, which is what Sebastianos was talking about with having your friends do it. At our practice, we run a Pell practice every night, and we found that we created a Google sheet that has a randomized set that randomizes a set of numbers. And we get, and then we found a free text-to-speech software that calls out triplets of numbers, and you work on trying to throw those three. Ultimately, the goal is we want to find drills that become more representative of what you're going to experience in the actual tournament, right? Okay. But until we get to that, we can start with simple levels where we don't cognitively overload our students, right? We can look at, we can find ways of simplifying it down, making things simpler, take out equations like what Steve was talking about, doing it without footwork, doing it with footwork, doing it with, chaotic footwork, right? All of those are an increase towards the representativeness of our sport. And there's a concept in sports psychology or sport performance learning called repetition without repetition, right? We have to practice doing these things over and over, but what we want to practice, we don't want to practice a single solution over and over. We want to practice solving the problem. And the more you can do that, the more you can make that practice representative of what you're going to face on the tournament field, the more effective it's going to be.
Yeah, like Sean and I both have the opinion that like when every shot you throw, your return should have some kind of defense built into it, so that it's naturally picking up, a zone, right? So if I go and I'm throwing that jab, I'm going to bring the sword back kind of like this, because they're going to throw that flat snap to my head and it picks it up. And if I catch it halfway through, cool, I'm going to riposte and hit them in the head, because why not take their energy and throw it back at them?
Yeah, that's something Duke Havek out in the West talks about a lot. Is every time you're throwing a shot out there, your recovery creates a defense as well.
Yeah.
So we are at the top of the hour there. I got a couple other things that wanted to cover. We might go a little bit over here, but so there's a couple other things as far as neurodivergent types. I've got one of my squires is dyslexic, pretty bad. I chatted with him a little bit a while ago, and one of the things about dyslexics is typically dyslexia manifests in visual stuff gets jumbled up a lot. So when you look at numbers, they all get transposed. When you look at letters, they get all transposed. So people with dyslexia, a lot of them are going to be kinesthetic learners rather than visual learners. And so you're going to have to work with them and you're going to have to show them how to do things, and let them throw shots on you to try to work some of that stuff out there. And there's again there's so many types of neurodivergent that we could really go a lot deeper into.
And not to like discourage people, there's some gifts that come out of it too. You can brush, you can clean up, so like you have to come up with some coping mechanisms, but like my ability for pattern recognition is really, really good. Sean and I fought, and I think that was the thing that caught his attention with the way I fought. If he did something to me more than once, I had figured it out and was not going to let that happen again. I'm very defensive counterpuncher.
So then I just changed it up.
So we would just keep changing it, and he and I just kept morphing, and that's why we became friends. So, but it's that you can take that hyper focus and turn it into a gift. It is a negative, and you can be unintentionally rude by being excited and not reading people's social cues very well and stuff like that. But you can turn some of these things into gifts. And I think I just wanted to throw that in at the end, because I know at one point we had talked about highlighting the good part of it, not just the struggles. But
and in preparing for this, I talked to one of the other order of defense over in Scotland, and she's also autistic, and she was telling me that her lack of social cues actually was a benefit, because so there's a lot of that thing where you don't want to include yourself in a conversation. You're hesitant to ask for help. You're hesitant to say, you're hesitant to say, it's like, oh, well, I'm not really, they didn't explicitly invite me to be part of their social thing. So they don't want me there. But part of the way that her social divergence, I guess, happened, she didn't pick up, like she wouldn't picking up on whether or not she was welcome. So it's just like, hey, I need help with a thing, and so that was a way that for her it just kind of manifested in a way that ended up being beneficial to her, because she didn't have that reluctance and that hesitance to, she was just so excited about, it's like, hey, help me with the thing. And of course, part of that self-doubt that also comes with anxiety and depression, is that overwhelming sense that I'm not worthy, I don't deserve their attention, I'm bothering them, I'm wasting their time.
Yes.
There's a lot of that, and because the way her autism manifested, it kind of came out that she didn't have that function. So she's just like, hey, look, I need help. And of course, we want to help. Like, overwhelmingly, the people in our sport, particularly, I mean, those of us that are neurotypical, we want to help. Like I'm constantly telling people that the people that have the information that you need are dying to give it away to people who are actually going to do something with it. We want to help you. We want to be available to you. And I understand that your brain tells you otherwise. And I guess, you know, that's kind of, I mean, I did kind of want to, I wanted to touch briefly on the, I wanted to talk a lot more on the depression and anxiety part of this as well. Helgi, you ever have one of those days where you just didn't feel like doing anything?
Yeah. So one of the problems with depression is one of the symptoms is called anhedonia, which means without pleasure. And a lot of the times I'll come home and I'm just low energy. You'll see me, my affect is completely flat. My speech will be deliberately slowed. I can be, just zoning out on things, and I struggle to follow conversations. And those days are really, really hard for me to go to practice, right? Because part of anhedonia isn't just that you don't experience pleasure for the things that normally bring you enjoyment, but you don't expect pleasure from the things that normally give you enjoyment. So you run into the days of, where every single part is a step. And the thing is that for this condition, the thing that's going to help me the most is going out and having a whole lot of physical activity. I need to get exhausted. And if I do that, that's going to kick my beta endorphins up. I'm going to feel so much better. But even knowing on a cognitive level, it's a struggle. There's something that Duke Mark says is, one of those days when you struggle to maintain motivation is don't rely on motivation, rely on habit. And the more you can force yourself into these patterns of this is something that I do on this night. This was, I run my drill practice on Wednesday nights before the pandemic started, right? And that was one of the things that basically allowed me to kind of shape my week, right? I knew that it was Wednesday. I'm going out to practice. And on the other side to it is that there's social motivation tied into it as well. If I have somebody who's coming to practice that is driving a half hour, an hour, and I don't show up, I'm going to really let them down. And that is horrible, right? The more you can rely on each other for motivation, the easier some of these repetitive tasks become, because the quest for improvement is not something that happens on the first day, right? Or even the first year. Sometimes it takes us a decade or more. And we, even at the stage where, we're at now, the path doesn't end. There's always more ways to improve. And, to walk that path, sometimes, we need help from other people, and social motivation is one of those huge tools. So.
Yeah. Jocko Willink is a former Navy SEAL that has a podcast, and that's one of his big things too. Is motivation. Motivation is fleeting at best. Discipline. That's what you're talking about. Yeah. Discipline.
And that comes with structure.
It has that structure, and because discipline is something you can control. Motivation is something that hits in fits and spurts, and motivation relies heavily on you wanting to do the thing. And that's the thing about depression in particular, and anxiety also related is well, the best way I can say this is your brain is an asshole. Depression lies to you. Anxiety lies to you. Your brain is an asshole. Don't don't believe it. And I understand that it's not as simple as just turning it off. I'm not at all suggesting well, you just get over it.
But you should trust your friends. And when they're telling you that you're worthwhile and your brain's telling you you're not, don't double down on yourself. They're there being supportive for a reason. You listen. It's hard to do, but that one's on you. The first part of it, you can't help the brain chemistry thing. But if you're not listening to those who are telling you that you are worthy and that they want you around and that they are supportive, and the SCA is full of these wonderful people, that at that point it's on you. You've got to take the effort to, at that point, to listen to them and take the next step, because they can't take the step for you.
Yeah. So, if you happen to suffer from depression and your brain is telling you not to go to practice because nobody wants you there, that is the point that you hear my voice in your head and you say, Duke Sean says you're an asshole and I'm going to practice anyway.
Yeah.
And find a friend you can anchor on, because that social thing Helgi was talking about is real.
Helgi, got something else?
Yeah, just that there is a term for this. It's called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. Again, the more, a lot of times when you can put a name to these things, and then they become less idiosyncrasies of you and more things that are out there that there are solutions for that other people have found. And
not alone.
So, yep, you are not alone.
Yeah, I mean, the SCA is full of, we are a social club of socially awkward people. Some of us worse than others, but we are a club of socially awkward people. And we found our individual tribes, but sometimes we got to even step back from our households and everything else and remember we're all in the same community and we're all here to better each other.
Right. Sadb, you got one more thing on that?
Yeah, I guess.
Exercise.
Oh yeah, I was going to talk about that. Exercise, as we've mentioned, he was talking about it being really good for depression, but really it's good for sort of all mental health. I know that's one of the things that my doctor told me when I got my diagnosis. They were like, do you do sports? You should probably do more of them. They're really good for you. It helps fix brain chemistry and even things out. It does wonderful things for moods and energy levels, and especially for anyone that's got a neurodivergence or a mental health disorder or anything like that. One of the best things you can do for yourself is stay on top of your exercise, stay on top of your meds if you have them, stay hydrated, like take care of your body, and it makes it easier for your brain to sort of chill out.
Yeah. So we are a little bit over our regular time, but this has been really important. So I just want to do some final thoughts. Seabass, we'll start with you. If you have any, you want to summarize real quick?
Yeah, I mean, I think in short, training and training is key, but what you have to have structure with it. Break things up into small bites that people can work toward achievable goals that have an immediate gratification and aren't lost in very lofty ideas. Don't oversaturate people, just as a general rule. Communication is really important, and some of us suck at it. I personally get really excited, and like I'm super. I'm technically an introvert, but everyone in my kingdom is going to laugh because I'm also very chatty, clearly. But only about topics that I really love. Otherwise, I'm going to stand over in the corner and kind of be with myself or just my close friends. Understand that there's a lot of different communication styles out there, and don't come off half-cocked just because you don't get their communication style. Try to find a friend that can help you communicate, reassess how you communicate. Humans are very complex things, so I think I would leave it at that.
Yeah. Sadb, a quick summary for you.
Yeah, my final thoughts is communication is key, as he was saying. Two fighters, your coach, trainer, person is probably more than willing to help adjust to your needs, but it's really hard for them to do that if you don't tell them what's going on. Trainers, if you have neurodivergent students, especially if they're you know, diagnosed and on meds and things, they probably can tell you all kinds of interesting things about it and their specific cocktail of issues and coping mechanisms and what does and doesn't work for them. And if you are there listening with an open mind, you can save yourself a lot of time. And the other thing is, in general, we always talk about being on the path, and this whole fighting thing is a journey. And especially for anyone with neurodivergence or other mental health issues, that includes self-discovery of possibly you run into symptoms you didn't know you had or a new trigger you never knew about, and stuff can go horribly wrong once in a while when you stumble on something. It can also go really amazing when you discover something that just shifts you right into the good space. So be, as we said back at the beginning, the physically safe space to do emotionally dangerous things. Do your best to make your practice and your experiences that safe space to have these discoveries and work around them and move on so you can keep doing the physically dangerous things.
Yeah. Helgi?
And on the other side of that, find ways of making your the practice space emotionally, safe for them to do the physically dangerous things. Right? We're asking you to get them to get hit. We're asking them to risk being in pain. You know, these are some common things, but also respect their that they need to learn how to self-regulate their boundaries. And that that sometimes or the risks that we bring to the field aren't always physical, like past injuries or so forth, but sometimes they're psychological, like past trauma, or even social, like just wanting to belong to a group, or fear of being judged or excluded. The more that we can, create the more we do this, create this emotionally safe place for them to explore, the more inclusive our society will become.
Yeah. This was an episode that kind of came about from conversations that I've had with some of my students. And when it occurred to me that this is something I wanted to do, it became important very quick. And I cannot stress enough how this has actually made me a better trainer, I think. Having these conversations, being able to talk with people, because again, as somebody who's neurotypical, there's a limit to which I can empathize with some of what's going on. I can understand how it affects people, but I can't really feel it in the same way that they do.
Don't worry, us people on the spectrum are really terrible with that whole empathy thing too. We don't mean to be, but it's kind of happens.
But as trainers, one of the things that I've come to realize about this is as trainers, it is a very easy thing for us to do to address and accommodate neurodivergent learning types. One of the things that I know that I can do, we've had some conversations recently about, especially Sir Rifkin of Ontier in her Murder Dukes interview series. She's mentioned several times, it's come up, the idea that, you go to do pickups and you get done with a set of fights, and the student says, Squire says, hey, do you have any suggestions or anything I can fix? And just happened to find somebody that wasn't really planning on doing analysis, and so one of the things she was talking about is have that conversation up front, right? You go to, if you are an emerging student trying to make your way in the world, you need to speak up and say, hey, can we do some fights? And after we get done, would you be kind enough to give me some pointers, give me some evaluation, right? So that's one way that the student can kind of drive that a little bit. But as a trainer, I understand now that this is something that I can do to accommodate this, that is very easy for me to do. It is a simple change. It's something that I've not done, because when I'm training, when I'm doing pickups, anytime I'm doing pickups anywhere in the world, there's an evaluation happening in my eyes, right? Most of the times I'm doing evaluation for somebody else. But if I find somebody that comes out and just hands me my ass, I'm doing the evaluation. I'm getting my own ruthless self-assessment. And, but there's somebody is going to learn something from our fights. It might be me and it might be you. But I realize now that one of the things that I can do as a trainer when somebody comes up to me and says, hey, can we do some fights? It's very simple. I can say, are you interested in getting feedback after we get done? If not, we can just fight. That's fine too. Would you like some feedback when we get done? So I get to ask that question instead of putting it on the student, right? Because that gets into power dynamic stuff. So I can say, would you like some feedback after we get done? Yes, no, whatever. I can also very simply ask, do you have any learning difficulties that I need to be aware of? It's that simple. I can ask that question up front. Is there anything about your learning style that I need to be aware of? And that's part of why I want to do this episode is, again, we need to destigmatize mental health issues, especially in the United States in general, and in the SCA, in our fighting experience. It is something we can do that is very easy. It costs nothing. And we can change the world, honestly. Start talking about it, be comfortable talking about it. And again, as my friend Rifkin has said about other issues, we need to acknowledge that these things exist without dwelling on them. But let's talk about it. Let's engage that conversation. Let's help those students. And above all else, I guess the message that I wanted to get across to those that are neurodivergent is you are not alone. We see you. We are here for you. So,
Sean, if I can, let me add two quick things. One, a common thing I see is if there's a person in a corner that's in armor that's not fighting people and stuff, don't sit there and go, well, they don't want it bad enough. Go over there and talk to them. They probably want to fight you, but they're scared of you. So go talk to them. I mean, that's a real big piece of that. That I think, the onus is on us who love this sport already to go show them why this is so awesome.
Yeah.
And because, all right, so that's the only other action item I think I would throw on the table.
Yeah. Well, I would like to thank our esteemed guest tonight. You guys have all just, again, provided me such a wealth of information. It really has. It's made me a better trainer. I'm really looking forward to being able to work with people and just ask those questions at the beginning of a pickup session that I have. And most people are just going to fight and they'll be fine. But it's a very small change that I can do in what I teach. And you guys have been a huge part of educating me on that. And based on the comments that we've had in the live feed there, I think this has been important. We could probably talk for several hours more.
I was flattered to be involved, so thank you.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining us. And as always, Vesper, you are, as I said, the glue that holds this whole thing together. So we really appreciate your efforts week in and week out to get this thing going and be our production. We really appreciate you. So
thank you all for coming on tonight. It's hard talking about anything that's a personal experience and putting yourself out there. It's a very vulnerable situation. So thank you to all of you for sharing that. And it's a good foundation for us to all think about when we're, walking around outside. We run into other humans. We are not all built the same way. So.
Well, I guess one of the other things we get after this is if you think we're talking to you, we probably are.
Yeah.
hopefully there's probably going to be somebody out there that has struggled with some of these things and didn't recognize them for what they are. So hopefully we give some exposure to that, to deal with that. So next week on the Coach's Corner, I believe, are we doing a conversation, right? We are doing a conversation with Count Steinar, who currently lives in Eldemir. He was king up there, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. He's originally from Antir. He's done several videos of some of the Pellwork stuff that he's doing. He's actually got a top-down view of his Pellwork, and some like graphics and arrows and shit. And he's a really, really fun guy to talk stick with. So we're gonna be having a conversation with him. So that'll be a lot of fun. So everybody tune in for that. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight for a really important topic. Really appreciate all the comments in the Facebook feed. If we did not get to your question, we're gonna have all these guys go through the comments as well to look at things. And we'll respond to the comments, and we'll respond to the questions if you have anything. If you have further questions, you can also always post them up on the SEA Coaches Corner on Facebook. Video will be available on SEA Coaches Corner on YouTube as well. So yeah, tune in next week, and thanks everybody for joining us.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good week.
All right, have a good night.
Bye.